Antonina Panfilova Makarova, better known by her nickname Tonka the Machine Gunner, was one of the most mysterious and terrifying figures of World War II. Her story is an example of how a seemingly respectable life can hide a dark past that would shock an entire country. For 30 years after the war, the Soviet secret services searched for this woman, but she managed to blend into peaceful life. She worked in a sewing factory, earned the respect of her colleagues, had her portrait hung on the honor board, married a war veteran, and gave birth to and raised 2 daughters. No one even suspected that this modest worker had served the Nazis during the occupation, acting as an executioner and shooting dozens of Soviet citizens every day. More than 1,500 people died because of her, and she did it all with full awareness and cold-bloodedness. When her secret was finally revealed in 1978 and the court handed down a death sentence, society was shocked. She became the 3rd woman to be executed in the USSR after the Stalin era. Her capture and trial caused a real sensation. Antonina Makarova Panfilova's biography is full of gaps. Even her year of birth is unknown. It is believed that she was born in 1920 in the village of Malaya Volkovka in the Smolensk province into a large peasant family. There were 7 children in the family, and Antonina was the youngest. A strange incident occurred when she was still in school. When her documents were being processed, her patronymic and surname were mixed up. Instead of Panfilova, the girl was registered as Makarova, and without changing anything, it was left that way. From that moment on, the youngest daughter of the Panfilovs began to bear someone else's surname, under which she would go down in history as Tonka the Machine Gunner. When she was a teenager, the family moved to Moscow. There, in the capital, Antonina graduated from high school. After graduating from school, Tanya Makarova enrolled in a medical technical school, dreaming of becoming a doctor. However, studying did not come easily to her. Her classmates recalled that she did not show much enthusiasm for her studies and barely had enough knowledge. Instead, Tanya devoured books about the Civil War and was particularly inspired by stories of female heroes. Her true idol was a fictional but very popular figure of the time, Anka the Machine Gunner, the image of a fearless female warrior. This romantic image seemed to stick in her mind, forming a distorted view of glory and heroism in the girl. When the Great Patriotic War began in 1941, Tanya enlisted as a volunteer without hesitation. She later claimed that she served as a nurse and pulled wounded soldiers from the battlefield, showing courage and self-sacrifice. However, her colleagues, interviewed by investigators years later, refuted these stories. They recalled that Tanya actually worked as a buffet attendant in the soldiers' canteen and was only formally enrolled as a medic shortly before the regiment was surrounded. In fact, she did not have time to visit the front line or experience the horrors of Real Medical Service. Antonina's life at the front did not last long, only about 3 months. In October 1941, her regiment was surrounded near Vyazma, the so-called Vyazma Cauldron, in which tens of thousands of Soviet soldiers were trapped. Makarova was taken prisoner by the Germans. This was a critical moment in her life, which marked the beginning of her path of betrayal. However, she soon had a chance to escape. One of the prisoners, Red Army soldier Nikolai Fedchuk, suggested that she flee. Despite the risk, Tanya agreed. The escape was successful. They broke away from their pursuers and wandered through the forests for almost 2 months, trying to reach their homeland. All this time, they stayed together, sharing hardships and fear. Later, during interrogations by investigators, Antonina claimed that Fedchuk was a rapist and had once assaulted her. However, researchers believe that this story may have been fabricated. Most likely, the girl went with him voluntarily and may even have shown sympathy for him, fearing to remain alone in the remote forests. They were united not only by a common ordeal, but also by the desire to survive. Finally, at the end of November 1941, the fugitives reached the village of Krasny Kolodets in the Lokniansky district, Fedchuk's homeland. Here their paths diverged. Antonina most likely had hopes for a future life with Fedchuk, with whom she had escaped from German captivity. Perhaps she even saw him as her protector and potential life partner. However, her expectations were shattered. In the village of Krasny Kolodets, it turned out that Nikolai had a wife and 2 children, and he no longer needed his traveling companion. He showed her no sympathy and simply left her alone, forcing her to find new ways to survive deep behind enemy lines. Abandoned, Hungry and homeless, Makarova began to wander around the surrounding villages. For a while, she was taken in by some kind-hearted local women who, feeling sorry for the young girl, gave her a place to stay in their house, fed her, and let her get her strength back a bit. But she didn't show any gratitude. Antonina's behavior quickly caused irritation. She began to flirt and seduce the husbands of her benefactors, behave provocatively, and then she was accused of theft. All this led to a loud scandal, and soon Antonina was expelled from the community, effectively banished from the community. Once again on the brink of survival, the girl was faced with a cruel choice. She had only two options: either go into the forest and join the partisans, where she would have to share hunger, cold, and danger with other fighters for the motherland, or choose the path of betrayal, to go over to the enemy, collaborate with the Nazis, but in return receive food, shelter, and relative safety. Makarova, without hesitation, chose the latter. She was not attracted by hardship. She sought comfort and protection. Moreover, according to rumors, the Germans treated those who voluntarily joined their service well, providing them with food, clothing, and even payment for their cooperation. In January 1942, Antonina arrived in the village of Lokot, occupied by German troops, located about 100 kilometers south of Bryansk. She did not hide or hesitate, but confidently headed straight for the German commandant's office. This was not just a settlement. At that time, Lokot was the capital of the so-called Lokot Republic, a unique puppet state created by the Nazis in the occupied territory. The Republic was an experimental model of self-government under the protectorate of the Third Reich, in which power was exercised by collaborators. At the head of the Lokot Republic was Bronislaw Kaminsky, a man with a controversial biography. He had previously been a staunch Bolshevik, but in 1935 he fell victim to repression. He was arrested for criticizing the party line and, allegedly, for moonshining. After his imprisonment, he was exiled to Lokot. When German troops occupied these territories, Kaminsky did not hesitate to cooperate with them. People like Antonina Makarova, lonely, without family, friends, firm moral principles, or ideological convictions, were a real find for Bronislaw Kaminsky. He understood perfectly well that it was precisely from such people, broken by war, despair, and the desire to survive at any cost, that one could mold the ideal executor of dirty tasks. Makarova did not ask unnecessary questions, did not experience pangs of conscience, and was ready to do anything for a piece of bread and a warm place to sleep. Therefore, as soon as she showed up in Lokot, Kaminsky almost immediately found a use for her. He offered her a job at the commandant's office. The position turned out to be sinister. Antonina was offered the job of full-time executioner. For her work, she was paid a considerable salary for those times, 30 Reichsmarks. Her immediate superior was the head of the local auxiliary police, a policeman. The girl's duties included participating in executions. She had to shoot Soviet prisoners, partisans, civilians, old people, women, and even children with a submachine gun. For this purpose, a ditch was specially equipped on the outskirts of the village, in front of which the doomed were lined up. Antonina was given a machine gun, and she opened fire, leaving no chance of survival. Those who miraculously remained alive were finished off with a pistol. The first execution was difficult for her. To overcome her fear and moral paralysis, she was given vodka beforehand. However, she did not need alcoholic support for long. After just a few days, Makarova was playing her role with frightening ease. The executions became routine for her. They were usually carried out once a day, with an average of 20 to 30 people. But sometimes she was sent a second time on the same day if the number of those sentenced was particularly large. Tanya was increasingly referred to as Tanya the Machine Gunner, a nickname that echoed her childhood dreams of the heroic exploits of Anka the Machine Gunner from her favorite books, but now distorted to the point of absurdity and horror. Makarova quickly began to perceive murder as a normal part of life. Moreover, she found her own benefit in the executions. After the shootings, and sometimes even before them, she personally searched the bodies of the dead. She took off their clothes, took their jewelry, and took their money. These trophies became an additional income to her salary. She sold the shot-up clothes and kept some items for herself. Thus, the daily routine of an executioner became a source of comfort and prosperity for her. During the day, Makarova shot prisoners, and in the evening she waltzed at dances with German soldiers. She behaved provocatively, not hesitating to engage in intimate relationships with the occupiers in exchange for gifts, money, or simply for her own pleasure. Tonka the machine gunner's promiscuity and lack of principles made her an integral part of the Nazi system of terror, and at the same time ensured her relative safety. The irony of fate is that it was her debauchery and promiscuity that ultimately saved her life, but also led to her temporary isolation. In the summer of 1943, Makarova contracted syphilis. The Germans did not abandon or execute her as useless. On the contrary, they sent her deep into the rear, to a hospital for treatment. So when the Red Army entered Lokot in 1943, reoccupying the village and organizing public executions of collaborators and executioners, the name of Tonka the machine gunner did not even appear on the lists. Antonina Makarova miraculously escaped retribution. By that time she was far from those places, in German-occupied Poland. There, while undergoing treatment for syphilis, she met a Wehrmacht corporal, with whom she soon fell in love. The girl executioner seriously hoped to start a new life with him, perhaps even to leave together for Germany after the war. However, these dreams were not destined to come true. Her German lover died, most likely in the battles on the Eastern Front. Antonina found herself alone and, like thousands of others, in captivity. After the defeat of Nazi Germany, she ended up in a concentration camp where liberated Soviet citizens and prisoners of war were held. But even there, she did not lose her composure. Makarova somehow got hold of someone else's military ID, introduced herself under a fictitious name, and, hiding her past, convinced the inspectors that she was a Soviet soldier who had been taken prisoner. Surprisingly, her lie did not arouse suspicion. Moreover, she was able to temporarily join the Red Army, where she served for some time, finally establishing herself in her new role as a modest, real Soviet woman soldier. Her complete transformation took place when she married war hero Sergeant Victor Ginsburg. He was Jewish by nationality and had lost almost his entire family during the Holocaust, and of course, he could not even imagine who his chosen one really was. Antonina behaved like an exemplary wife. She cooked, did laundry, took care of him, and was affectionate. Soon they had a daughter, and then, after moving first to Kaliningrad and then to the Belarusian city of Lepel, a second. Antonina Ginsburg, as she was now called, got a job at a sewing factory, worked honestly, and even received anniversary medals as a war veteran on holidays. Neighbors, colleagues, acquaintances, no one suspected her of being a monster. A veteran, the wife of a frontline soldier, the mother of 2 daughters, a hard worker. There were many such people in post-war USSR. Only some of those around her noticed a strange trait. Antonina never shared her memories of the front, avoided talking about the past, did not support toasts to her comrades in arms, and was reluctant to be photographed. There was a sense of wariness and secrecy about her, as if she had always lived looking over her shoulder. Tonka herself had enough composure and cynicism to speak to school children on Victory Day and at assemblies on September 1st, telling fictional stories about how she supposedly rescued the wounded from the front lines, dragged her comrades out from under bullets, and fed soldiers from her mess tin. She was even a member of the local Veterans Council and had a reputation as a respected, elderly woman. The medal she was given as a war participant made an impression, and her modest behavior only reinforced the trust of her neighbors and colleagues. Children and teenagers listened to her with open mouths, and adults sincerely respected her. No one could imagine that behind this facade was an executioner whose hands had destroyed more than 1,500 people. Later, after her exposure, she confessed that in the first 10 years after the war, she shuddered at every knock on the door and woke up from nightmares. She felt that they were about to come for her. But over the years, her fear subsided. The past began to seem distant, non-existent. She convinced herself that no one was looking for her. Moreover, more than 30 years had passed, a generation had changed, and the archives had gathered dust. Everything seemed to have been reliably forgotten. But she was wrong. They were indeed looking for Tonka the machine gunner. KGB officers did not give up trying to track her down, even if the chances of success were minimal. Bit by bit, they pieced together a picture of the crimes, interviewed surviving witnesses, and pored over thousands of pages of archives, reports, and wartime records. However, there were virtually no real leads. Many documents had been lost, burned, or destroyed. In addition, the fact that Antonina had lived her entire life under a false name made the search much more difficult. She was listed in documents as Tonka Makarova, while after the war she became Antonina Ginsburg. But the investigators had no photograph, no exact date of birth, and no reliable information about her place of residence. All attempts to identify her through Germany or Poland, where she had been during the war, also came to a dead end. And yet, luck unexpectedly smiled on them. In the 1970s, one of the investigators working on war crimes cases came across a mention of a woman named Antonina Makarova, who fought on the side of the Nazis and fired a machine gun at Soviet prisoners. The name was rare, but there were too many coincidences. The investigator began to dig through the archives and came across an old report marked Tonka, Machine Gunner. Went to the rear. It seemed like another clue in a long chain of failures, but he did not give up on the case. Then, by chance, the KGB came across a document mentioning a resident of the city of Lepel named Antonina Ginsburg, a woman with suspiciously similar biographical details. In 1976, when Antonina's older brother, a Soviet army officer named Panfilov, was preparing to travel abroad on official business, he honestly stated on his application form that he had a sister named Antonina Ginsburg, née Makarova. It was this mention that unexpectedly activated the security services. The fact is that the surname Makarova coincided with the long-closed but not forgotten case of Tonka the machine gunner, a woman who served the Nazis and shot prisoners with a machine gun in the vicinity of the village of Lokot. The special services took an interest, and KGB officers began covert surveillance of Antonina Ginsburg in the Belarusian town of Lepel. Despite her seemingly perfect biography, medals, a sewing factory, a veteran's family, alarming inconsistencies began to surface during the investigation. Attempts to establish her wartime past proved fruitless. Ginsburg could not name her unit number, the names of her commanders, or describe the circumstances of her service. She just kept saying that she had forgotten everything in 30 years, and couldn't say anything else. Her handwriting was compared to archived documents with Tonka Makarova's signature. A secret identification was organized. The key moment came when several elderly women, residents of the former Lokotsky district who had survived the occupation, were brought to Lepel. When they were shown Antonina Ginsburg, they identified her without a shadow of a doubt as the very executioner who had shot prisoners and partisans. One woman in particular was overcome with emotion. She said that she would never forget Makarova's face because her younger sister was among those who had been shot. After that, the investigators had no doubts. The arrest was carried out quietly, right at her workplace. Under the pretext of a summons to her superiors, Antonina Ginsburg was invited to the factory director's office, where KGB officers were already waiting for her. When handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she showed neither surprise nor fear. She just bowed her head and silently followed the operatives. The investigation into the case lasted almost 2 years. In the end, it was possible to officially prove her involvement in the executions of 168 people, although the actual number of victims, according to estimates, could have exceeded 1,500. In 1978, the Supreme Court of the USSR sentenced Antonina Ginsburg to the highest punishment, execution by firing squad. The sentence was carried out in August 1979. She never fully admitted her guilt, claiming that she was following orders. Her husband, Victor Ginsburg, was shocked to learn who had been sharing his bed and raising his daughters all this time. He, a Jew who had lost almost all of his relatives during the war, could not believe that his wife was an accomplice of the Nazis. In a matter of days, he turned gray. Victor gathered his daughters, quit his job, and disappeared from the city without a trace. According to unofficial sources, he emigrated to Israel with his family, changing his surname to forget his terrible past forever. Thus ended the story of one of the most cruel female collaborators of World War II, Tanky the machine gunner, who lived for more than 30 years under the guise of a respectable Soviet citizen.